because there is this stupid, as a history teacher, I get this all the time, this stupid dichotomy, north-south like divide, the way we teach history, as if like from the get-go the North was just like anti-racism and helping, and like it's still not, right? Like still one of the most racist cities in America is like Boston, right? Like, and there's a reason these race riots broke out throughout the 20th century in places like Detroit or Newark or whatever, right? Like I get that California is not the North, but in theory it's this more liberal place. So when you think of Watts or South Central or whatever, right, there's a reason those things are taking place, is because that racism is inherent. And that's obviously where we bring like James Baldwin in, because James Baldwin was like fire in terms of talking about this northern form of like racism, rather than, whereas Du Bois was talking about, right, like more that southern, like the soul of black folk and things along those lines.
This is very random, but have you guys done an episode about Bob Marley? Because I love Bob Marley and his works.
We haven't. I can, so we kind of want to, and we've talked about it, but I don't know, we might. So we always like, we don't want to be blunt, to be the white dudes interpreting other, like, we don't want to always be that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Like, so for me to come in and then do some sort of like historical breakdown of Rastafarianism and like the whole ethos of Jah, like I could do the history. I could take it all the way back to actually King Solomon. I know the history of this stuff. And it does. It goes all the way back to biblical times in terms of that. And the Kebra Nagast, have you ever read that? It was like part of his inspiration, like the Ethiopian holy text that actually founded Rastafarianism. Anyway, like we could do all that. We just don't know if it's our place. Like, you know what I'm saying?
And it's the same with hip hop, right? We have students all the time that are like, oh my God, will you please do a class on hip hop? It'd be so good. And I'm like, we could definitely easily do that. And it would be really good. But like two white dudes having a class on hip hop, like is stupid. Like we're not going to be those people. You know what I mean? Like that's just not our place.
See it now. Like I get cringy, dude. I still cringe to Eminem. Like I do feel like there's appropriation there. Like there's no doubt that he is a very talented human being and that he's made some pretty damn good songs. That's undeniable. But it still feels cringy, right? Like I don't know, to me a little bit. Or Jack Harlow, who's out now, right? Or I mean, I guess Vanilla Ice and Macklemore were always kind of cringy, but but I don't know. I mean, if the culture is willing to accept these artists, I suppose we could probably provide commentary, but we still don't feel like it's our place. I don't know.
Yeah, then is our class going to be white hip hop? That'd be terrible.
Yeah, no, I meant just like hip hop in general, right?
I would show up to one class of that white hip hop. I would.
What?
Just to get the premise of it.
Oh my
like,
God.
I
mean, what is there? There's either industry plants or frat boy hip hop. Like those are your choices.
Yeah.
Like the only ones that have earned any respect are like literally M and maybe Logic.
I was gonna say Logic. What about Iggy Azalea?
Yeah. LPs obviously earned some respect from Run the Jewels and maybe Ra the Rugged Man, R.A. the Rugged Man, but Aesop Rock, I guess. I guess there are a couple that have earned respect, but they're overshadowed by the corny ones, right? Like they are.
Yeah, because those are the mainstream, like you said, I don't want to say industry plants, but like that's, you know.
Anyway, all right. All that aside, that was a long explanation as to why we might not be doing an episode on Bob Marley, because it'd be kind of the same thing, like a couple of white dudes, like, again, co-opting, like biting off other people's shit. And I just don't feel like that's our place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it would just be fun to do that. But
I mean, we would love it. Yeah, of course. But we tried to do classes on things that we're passionate about, you know what I mean? But we just get to be passionate. Two white dudes that grew up in the suburbs that are passionate about hip hop. We don't get to be scholars that teach about it. You know what I mean? That's just not our place.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, I mean, it's literally what you said when you were talking about the art and the poetry. It's representation, not just representation in the art itself, but who gets to interpret that art, if that makes sense.
Or I will say, like, if no one was out there teaching classes and talking critically about hip hop, like there was no one doing that, and like we felt it was our responsibility to take on that conversation, then I would feel a responsibility to do it. But clearly there are Black scholars that are doing it much better than we would ever do it. You know what I mean? So it's like, why add ourselves to that conversation? It already exists, you know?
Have
Yeah.
you guys heard of speaking of Harlem, I think Questlove directed this, but Summer of Soul.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
So it's basically, I think it was the same year that Woodstock happened,
Mhm.
but it was essentially this music festival that happened in Harlem, and it was free. And like you have all these Black people coming together, and you have like Stevie Wonder and like these huge icons, and no one talks about it. Like people talk about Woodstock all the time, but no one talks about this event that happened. But
Yep.
you should check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that would actually be super interesting. I don't think I've ever researched that at all. But I mean, like that's just like the way that's dominant narratives, right? That's why we all remember Kent State and not Jackson State, right?
Hmm.
And that they happened almost the same year.
Right.
You know, during this era that we like the 60s and like the popular imaginary of like all of this like love, protest, rock and roll, sex, drugs, whatever, like all of that's just like absolute nonsense. But it's crafted like it wasn't really even any of those things, right? Like but it's crafted by a specific portion of the population to like kind of romanticize it, and again just for them to kind of like claim this is what we were doing. Anyway, one of the people that I taught with this last semester, Sam, in the history department, that's like her specialty, like the global 60s. And she broke it down like so well. Like what we think of the 60s isn't even really like really what even really happened. And it's not even unique to what did happen isn't even unique to the United States. Like more waves were made in other parts of the world than they were here, right? Anyway,
that movie won the Academy Award for Best Documentary.
The one that she's talking about with Questlove?
Mm-hmm.
He produced it,
yeah, but it's like just watching it, like they do interviews with the artists that were a part of it, but like these people like just light up just being able to talk about something they did decades ago, and they're like, oh well, like no one ever really gives us this opportunity to talk about this monumental event that a lot of people kind of look over. They think about Woodstock. They don't think about the thing that we had.
Right.
And the things we were singing about and how we had this moment to come together. But
that's erasure, right? We've talked about that before. That's straight erasure, right? Like that's what that is. It's like, I mean, even like I said, when we think about these things that I even briefly brought up, I always wanted to do an episode on it. I just don't know that it's my place either. But like the erasure of like the Black contribution to like everything pop culture, like it is all predicated on Black culture, almost all of it. Like at least in terms of music, and there are probably other art forms that I'm not familiar with, but like it really is.
Yeah, so like specifically jazz. Like when people were doing jazz, you had a lot of people saying that's not real music, and this is jungle music, and this is and that. And but when you get white musicians starting to do it, that's when it gets embraced.
Right. I was so kind of wanting you to like, I was low key wanting you to read that quote from How It Feels to Be a Colored Me, where Zora basically says that, like essentially like what she goes to the jazz club with her white friend and like the white guy's like, this is good music. But then she goes on like this paragraph of like, it's not just music, right? I didn't want to read the quote myself, but I had it highlighted. But I
mean, we could go back and
I don't know how we would insert it at this point. Yeah. That was the problem because I don't remember what that sounded like. But yeah. But she talks specifically about that. Like, anyway, like.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at this paragraph right now. But yeah, I don't know how it would fit in with the
people don't understand. They don't understand that like this art form that comes from Africa and then is it reinterpreted through the Caribbean and then reinterpreted through the Southern United States, both like on the plantations as a form of like agency and resistance, right? Code talking songs and stuff while people were working, while also coping. And then like the offshoot that takes place in like the Southern Baptist churches that are on the plantation, right? The Southern gospel. And like this then leads to like this weird infusion during Jim Crow of like, right, like the chain gang music, right? And all of the music that we see there that becomes like the blues. And then the blues leads to the jazz, and then the jazz leads to the rock. And like when you talk about it like that genealogy, and I'm sure like as not a music historian, I'm probably missing some important like little connections between them, but like whatever, when you look at that genealogy, like that's also erasure, right? Like by making Elvis the king of rock and roll, that's erasure, right? Like I at least think the Beatles at least kind of like gave like their like credit to where they got their art form from. So I'm not as hard on the Beatles as I am Elvis, but like Elvis just straight like plagiarized and jacked his shit, right? So
Yeah, like people don't give as much credit to Little Richard
yeah,
as they worship Elvis Presley.
right. No, Little Richard's
When
like
it should be the other way around.
mm,